coordinated to start. Dylan is on another call right now, should join us shortly. And I believe Ken is on the call with us and is first up for our discussion and with CARES dollars, and then he is off as well to another call today. So Ken? Give me just 1 second while I get him with us as well. Okay, let's try this again. Ken, have you made it? I believe he's calling in right now, so. Hello, Ken. So I know Ken and his team have been working pretty nonstop to get the CARES dollar piece figured out, especially their work with equitable services. They've been working diligently with the vendor that works with the e-grants, and they hope to have that solution ready to test this week. So that hopefully will be in play by Friday. So he can give you the better update on this than I can, but those are some of the key issues that are being addressed, is ensuring that the e-grant system will operate smoothly for our school districts, to ensure that equitable shares are identified properly, and also the ability to take the 10% set aside and make certain that can flow out as well. So those are the items he's been working on. I see Dylan has made it.
Thanks, Cheryl. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay, sorry, I don't know. Can I be so these guys sometimes will see there's conversation about the website and that also based on enrollments instead of on free and reduced counts. I've been our congressional delegation. Sorry, yeah, my internet. I usually never have issues with my internet was down here.
See if that.
Today is actually the first day that I've been working.
So Dylan, you're garbled, and we're going to see if folks can hear Ken via my system that I've got. So.
Good morning. How am I coming across?
It looks
okay.
Like I think you're okay.
So updates on CARES. The main thing I think is that we received a listing of frequently asked questions late on Friday that from the Department of Education. that's clarified a bunch of things for us, and I'll hit on those real quickly, and then let you know that we're trying to update our guidance to basically be all-encompassing and capture everything and have that posted this week. One of the key things in the frequently asked questions, and I think we talked about this in the last meeting, is that finally from the department there is a clear statement that there is no supplement, not supplant provision for this grant. I think that's important because another part of the grant is that it allows pre-award costs back to March 13th. So for a school that has used state or local funds to pay for an expenditure related to the coronavirus, and they want to then use the federal funds to go back and basically reimburse themselves for that expenditure, there is no concern about doing supplanting by doing that with these funds. As we look at the different ways that these funds can be used, though, it is still true that there are maintenance of effort requirements that we have to adhere to. But again, the statement that there is no supplement, not supplant provision for these funds, I think is critical and is beneficial to school districts. There is also, clarification of timing that was actually kind of a surprise to me based upon some of the previous things that we had from the CCSSO. The requirement for the state for the OPI is that we award all the costs within a year. And as before, it was seemed to be saying that the funds actually had to be distributed. The frequently asked questions clarifies that to say that the money has to be awarded within 1 year. Now, I will say that there is a clause that's contradictory in the frequently asked questions that we need to get clarified. But I'm going now with, I think the intent is that the OPI has to award all of the cost to schools or for the set aside any third parties by April of next year. And likewise for the grant period for the school districts, the frequently asked question clearly states that the grant period for school districts runs all the way through September 2022. In other words, that the school districts have that long to actually obligate funds, as opposed to obligate then expend, which is what I thought the guidance was coming through before. So there's a full 2 year and 5 months provision for the schools to be able to obligate these funds within like a 3-month cleanup period that we always see in federal grants to actually make sure all the funds are expended. And again, I think that's good news in that it gives flexibility to school districts. So again, we're trying to get our guidance all together to post one document for all of the ESSER funds, provisions and that kind of stuff. And we hope to have that out this week. So let me pause there and see if there are any questions.
So Ken, we have a question from Denise Williams. The question is, so the grant period then is March 13, 2020 through September 30, 2022?
In effect, yes, because the grant period on the GAN that we received states April, but again, the GAN and the guidance clearly states that the funds can be used for pre-award costs. So for costs that occurred before the award was made and the quote grant period started, the schools are able to go back and take costs that were paid from March 13th forward and use these funds to basically reimburse themselves for it.
Yeah, Ken, this is Kirk, and I have a question once again about equitable services. Can you interpret how that is going to blend into what's already been basically stated to our schools, that we're following the Title I formula for our public schools, and we've had spreadsheets that are out there about how that distribution of the 38 and change million will be coming to schools, and then the secretary's guidance on equitable services that change that landscape, and the set aside potentially for addressing equitable services for private and home schools. Can you describe how the intention of the office is to handle that? Are those dollars going to come out of the state side, the OPI side of the funding, that 4.1 million or so that is there, and you use $600,000 to make sure 10,000 goes to all schools that don't have Title I? So will those equitable services and provisions be provided through those state dollars, or will we have to adjust the allocation to every public school as a result of the changes that were in the secretary's guidance? And maybe third is how is the office planning on handling that whole guidance from the secretary?
So for the equitable services, what Kirk is referring to is that although the funds, the ESSER funds, the 90% are allocated to the schools using the Title I distribution for this year and making the ESSER funds proportionate to that distribution. The consideration for equitable services changes from what has been the Title I basis of looking at essentially low-income children in non-public schools compared to low-income students in public schools. The allocation that is included in the guidance that was given out is to use total enrollment at private schools, non-publics, I should say, and total enrollment at the school districts for calculating the basis for that. So since that's the guidance that the department has put out, that's what we're in the process of implementing. I do know, I mean, it will make a change in terms of the amount of money that is dedicated. It is also true that the CARES Act requires that any of the ESSER funds that go to LEAs are subject to equitable services. So for example, we had already said that there's about $625,000 of the 10% set aside that we will distribute to LEAs in order to make sure that every LEA gets a minimum of $10,000. We're also looking at possibly taking more of the 10% set aside and allocating to LEAs. All of those allocations will have to go into the in other words, the sum of the ESSER funds that go to the school district will have to be used as the basis for the equitable share calculation. And no, we are not separately providing the funds to districts to do that, because that would invoke kind of like a double loop. Like then those funds would be subject to equitable share distribution as well. So again, it'll be the total of the ESSER dollars that go to each district that will be considered for calculating equitable share. And the methodology that we're programming now is what the department has put out as guidance. In other words, the total enrollment. As of course, Kirk, you're aware because you had sent a document saying that the secretary should consider revamping that and using the Title I methodology. I understand there are other states that have other entities, I should say, that have done that as well. The CCSSO filed something. and we're kind of waiting to hear if that's going to change things or not.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. Yeah, our calculation in Montana of what that change in the secretary's guidance is about a $1.3 million differential statewide. And that's why, that there are CCSSO and AASA and NASSP, NAESP, AFT, NEA, all of the large education associations are working on having the secretary review that guidance as being potentially in violation of ESEA in the way that calculating for total population for equitable services for private and home schools as opposed to Title I for public schools.
Right, and we of course will follow what the department says we should do.
So Ken, there's two more questions that have come in. One from Mr. Parman saying, so with the idea of being able to go to March 13th, will districts receive the funds before this fiscal year closes out?
We certainly intend to open up e-grants so that schools can apply for funds way before the end of the year. We're hoping that by the end of this week we'll have an e-grants module that we can open up. But again, the programming has to take place, and I'm always on lines when programming is involved. The other, I think critical path on that is that prior to drawing funds, the schools will have to go through the equitable services process and determine what type of services are going to be provided to non-publics. But even given that, if schools want to take money in this fiscal year, we're doing everything we can to make that available to the schools.
So a couple more questions. One is if we're waiting on Secretary DeVos for clarification, does that mean we'll hold off on distributing CARES dollars?
No, at this point, what we're doing is proceeding with the guidance that the department provided to us. If it turns out that the secretary then reverses that decision, we would have to go through the process of recalculating everything from scratch again. But again, part of the problem is that we have no idea how long the department will take to consider this matter and to make a decision. So we're proceeding with the guidance as it exists with the idea of making funds available to schools.
And another question from Denise Williams, Executive Director at MASBO. Will the updated guidance from the OPI include the process in e-grants? That is application, approval of the application, how funds are drawn down. Can they ask for an advance or must it be a reimbursement? Frequency of reporting, quarterly or final program report?
The guidance in the draft format it is now has a simple explanation of the e-grants process and answers those questions. We don't anticipate to include in this guidance a detailed listing of the screens and e-grants or anything like this. We think that the module is being built similar to existing e-grants modules, and the schools will be familiar with that process.
That is all the questions that have come in the chat box. Dylan, back over to you.
Thanks. Can you hear me better now, Cheryl?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that was weird. I'm on my cell phone. I don't know what was going on with my laptop. I'm sure Ken covered everything that I was, going to fill folks in with. I just was going to add that I'm in touch with our congressional delegation right now to figure out where the department came up with that interpretation for flowing the funds out through enrollment as opposed to free and reduced. Yeah, we don't know if there was something that was insinuated in the language of the CARES Act that provided for that, or if the department just decided to do that. Hopefully at our call on Thursday, I'll have some more information. Like I said, the congressional offices are looking into how that decision was made. Is there any other topics or discussion on the CARES Act or that point, or any questions for Ken?
Hey, Dylan.
Yes.
This is Bill Mercer. I think that Dave Bedey and I were on the agenda to talk a bit about the interaction we've had with your office on this. I don't know if Dave's on or not, but I was just going to make a quick point that we've had a good dialogue with OPI folks about the limiting language in the CARES Act in terms of permissible uses, both in the preamble to the ESF funding and then a separate provision in section 22,004A. And it sounds like this has been the subject of this call in the past, but the Legislative Finance Committee folks have been concerned to make sure that the message was clear. As we were sort of looking at the language, we concluded that any notion that there's sort of broad-based flexibility for use of the dollars is really conditioned very precisely that they must be used to prevent, prepare for, and to respond to coronavirus. That's the specific language in 2 sections of the statute. So we have had good discussions with folks at OPI about this and are confident, given what we're hearing, that the guidance will reflect that. So we don't run the risk, whether it's the $10,000 allocation or the much larger allocation, we don't run the risk that sometime down the track, either the Department of Education or through a False Claims Act complaint, the state would be vulnerable to liability for any sort of expenditure that wasn't directly tied to those specific purposes. So we wanted to just reiterate that on the call this morning because I want to make sure that there is clarity among the grantees.
Thank you, Representative. We appreciate that. Yeah, now is definitely a good time for that discussion and update. Representative Bedey, are you on the line?
Yes, I am, Dylan. And I think my colleague from Billings, they made exactly the right point. Our concern from a legislative standpoint is that we're not vulnerable to some sort of clawback of this money sometime in the future, which could create a hole in the budget, perhaps not in the next biennium, but the biennium after that. So any sorts of controls that ensures that that we have this prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus mindset as we expend these funds, that we think is important. As you read the act, it's awfully easy to overlook that particular requirement and go right to the school districts having broad latitude on how to expend these funds. So I have nothing more to add on that. Just, we will make this group aware, very satisfied with the discussions we've had with the superintendent thus far.
Thank you, Representative Bedey. No, that's a very important point. And when we get additional and final guidance out to districts this week, we'll make sure and highlight that yes, districts do have broad flexibility, but they need to keep in mind that when they're accounting for the use of these funds, that it is tied directly to impacts to their district by the COVID outbreak. The superintendent, I'm sure Ken probably already said this when I got dropped, but the superintendent wants to ensure that these funds get out to districts as quickly as possible, and that students are and schools are getting to take advantage of that this school year and can also begin planning for next school year. I know that we're putting together task forces to work with the Montana School Safety Advisory Committee to get some guidance documents out to schools for the fall semester. And so we just want to be able to be as responsive to schools as possible, knowing that we really don't want to wait on the federal government for additional clarification or guidance on this, since the guidance that they put out is what stands right now. So that was all we had on the agenda. Are there any questions for the representatives or Ken or any other discussions? I know that all your groups are engaged on this, so if there's any updates that you want to provide about what your groups are working on, now would be a good time. Well, if there's nothing else, we're coming up here on 11 o'clock. Cheryl, do you have anything to add, or Ken, or any other OPI staff on the line?
Oh, it's just a great day to be a Montanan.
Yep. Oh, Diane has a question about, let me pull it up, the Montana Learn Task Force. So yeah, let me go into a little bit more detail on those task forces since they're not directly on the agenda. Cheryl, as our deputy superintendent, is overseeing a task force of school administrators, primarily superintendents and principals, to start looking at Montana code and Montana rules, and reaching out to schools to see what kind of flexibility they might need next year, so that we can then work with the legislature, the Board of Public Ed, and get the schools those flexibilities they need. I'm working on putting together a task force of parents, students, teachers, and community members to really get a sense of, how did the distance learning go? What do you need from a distance learning perspective, from a distance teaching perspective, from a teaching at home perspective? Trying to get that kind of broad and high level community, student, parent, teacher input. And then the goal would be to have this input and these recommendations go to the Montana School Safety Advisory Committee in June. And everyone on this call is welcome to participate in the School Safety Advisory Committee. Many of you already do. And then the goal would be to have the School Safety Advisory Committee put their official stamp on a big document that's not regulatory, but that provides good guidance to schools, to the legislature, to the Board of Public Ed, to all those entities, to make sure that, as we go into the fall semester, that schools have the tools that they need, and they know that their state level partners here are trying to make it as easy as possible for them to get their students proficient in those core subjects. So any questions about those? Yep, thanks, Diane. I know Pete's been, Pete Donovan with the Board of Public Ed has been working with Cheryl to make sure that they're engaged in this process. And I know that a lot of the advocates, especially Kirk and the School Boards Association and some others, are very active on the School Safety Advisory Committee. So we should have some really well-rounded guidance for schools, hopefully by the end of June is our goal. I don't know if Tracy's on the line, if Tracy wants to add anything about that, or the School Safety Advisory Committee. Yeah, Kirk made a good point. We want this guidance that goes out to be coordinated. We don't want to be sending out different advice from all of our different to all of our different constituencies that often overlap. So the School Safety Advisory Committee is going to be important in that it's full of school administrators, it's full of health officials, security officials, all sorts of folks from different backgrounds to be able to put together a holistic document that'll be well-rounded and encompassing of everything. You know, it's going to be about distance learning. It's going to be about flexibilities, but it's also going to be about student and staff health and safety, sanitation of schools, DPHHS's new rules. All those things are going to go into it. So that's where we're at with those task forces. Anything else? Well, thank you all for being on the call. If there's no other questions or comments at this time, Christy, you could probably go ahead and save this and we can wrap things up. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Dylan.